The aim is to understand that trauma is actually complex and it's multi-layered and can take a long time to heal. It's also, our aim is to co-build diverse, peaceful communities based on reciprocity and shared humanity, to highlight the limitations of current national and international policies and practices, to promote good practice with displaced persons and communities, and finally, to find a little hope in what is a divisive world. I'll begin with my journey as a refugee. I was born just after the Vietnam War, and I'm one of those both people who have experienced displacement and trauma on a journey that doesn't seem to end. Displacement to me is more like a journey of loss, because we could never really recover the possessions that we have, the homes we have, and the relations that we have. And it's an ongoing trauma of losing one's identity and one's sense of safety, particularly in the early part of the journey. And I can remember being on our boat, with my mum beside me, and always having to hold me close to her because of the fear of either losing me, either to the sea, or just losing me to other people who are exploiters. And it's also about a journey of resettlement as well. So once we have been able to be processed in what's known as the Galang Indonesian refugee camp, and that photo shows a picture of that, where we spent actually 13 months in very squalid conditions. It's also about finding that safety and a home, and we were fortunate to actually find a home in Australia in the early 80s. At that time, I have to say that there was more compassion in the world than what it is today for refugees. And that's probably because of a series of recessions and economic influences that really has hardened people's hearts. It wasn't all bad. There were also good points, and one of those is the fact of actually seeing humanitarian people and people who are actually supporting us to resettle, even if it's a simple act of saying hello, I'm your new neighbor, and would you like to join us for a cup of coffee or tea? And learning the new language and the new customs was quite interesting, and overall profoundly, I suppose, comforting for the people that were around me. That support network, I have to say, was very important in the pivotal days and weeks and months of settling in. The context of the 80s is also that Australia did come out of a white Australia policy. There was still a lot of discrimination, despite the government wanting to change things. It was over 123 years of the white Australia policy that affected both people from non-Caucasian backgrounds as well as those from Caucasian backgrounds. And if you look at the work of Margaret Humphreys and the effect of the children from here who have been taken forcibly against the knowledge of their parents to live in a colony like Australia is one point. The other point that I like to make is the impact it has on the stolen generation, where Indigenous children have been forcibly taken from their parents and their communities. So discrimination has still been around and probably is still around in Australia today. But I think what is important was also that there was, during the Fraser government, an intention at least to promote multiculturalism and the importance of valuing diversity and to actually fund ethno-specific services that are supported, coordinated and developed by the communities themselves, not least the Vietnamese community, which I found a job in, and it was my first job as a community development officer. I'm proud to say that was one of the best experiences I've ever had, to be able to support new Vietnamese migrants to settle, find housing, as well as Vietnamese wives who've been beaten by their husbands to find housing and refuge, and also to settle the Vietnamese second generation who are involved in drugs to find a place upon discharge from prison. So it was rather interesting when I did arrive in the UK in early 2002. The first thing that struck me was the top-down approach and the care management processes, which to me was rather odd with the values that I had. It was a challenge, I think, to practice in this environment, and probably still remains the challenge for us today. And that challenge is twofold. The first one is actually to reconnect with our communities, and that is so, so important. We can't hide away from the processes of managerialism or care management. And the other challenge is that we also need to move beyond the processes, inputs, and outputs into what I would regard is to reclaim our compassion. I wanted to also convey this image because it juxtaposes the journey that is not just only about me, but it's also about the many others as well, that have occurred in the past and are still occurring today. I think the image speaks for itself. So, what do displaced people like myself want in working with social workers to co-build safety, security, and belonging? I've thought about this, and the key areas I would suggest are these. We have to come from a strengths-based approach by deep listening. That's really important because deep listening transcends all language barriers. Whether you're practicing with the Indigenous community in Australia or with your client here, or even having a cup of coffee with our colleagues at the AGM, deep listening is the key to our practice. We also need to be aware that it's important to restore the ability to trust others, and that means being credible, speaking from our own experience, doing what we say we would do. It's important to also be an ally and advocate, to support in telling people's stories and their journeys and experiences too, and also to restore the control, choice, and autonomy that was lost through this journey of displacement. Engaging with communities to develop community assets is also another key aspect of this work, and co-building together the support networks that people need to survive and to thrive. We need to co-produce linguistic and culturally appropriate resources and services, promote citizenship inclusion and belonging in the wider community. And the equalities I would be looking at are those that would value and respect each person by first listening to their story. You have to have a strong human rights focus. You need to be reflective and also a good communicator. The multilingual and cultural knowledge is a bonus. That's my contribution. Ruth?
Hello. Thank you, Duke, for introducing that. I'm sitting here, I'm sorry, because I'm attached to the electricity down here so that I can read my notes. I thought that might be a helpful view on the way that we're going at the moment. I'm speaking to you as an independent social worker who works with lawyers to present situations to courts and tribunals when there are decisions being made about people being deported or extradited to countries that we don't want them to go to because they wouldn't be safe. And I'm also speaking from a reflection about my time in international social work and what I've learned. And some of the lessons I've learned about the value of learning from our colleagues around the world. And I was just listening to that last session and thought, you know, our Japanese colleagues, our colleagues in Vietnam, our colleagues in China, our colleagues in India, they have all experienced disasters. And we have a huge, rich learning out there. So there's a global context for this, and there's a global context for understanding how people move along across the world and what happens to them when they are moved around the world because of climate change, wars, disasters, and all the other things that happened, and how that trauma affects their lives in all sorts of different ways. So the context of this, and I'm going to come on to talk about Ali's story in a little while, but I just want to put it in that global context, that this is a real challenge for us as a profession, not just in the UK, but globally, about how we create Ubuntu in a global context, how we acknowledge our interconnectedness and our interdependence. Because some of the actions we take in our everyday lives, when we drive, when we don't recycle our plastics, when we don't do those kind of things, has a real impact on everybody, all of us, and we're in this together. So it is about a reflection on trauma. It is about people being displaced, but it's also about what we can do as a profession here. I don't know. I fell into this work when I kind of stopped working for BASWA. And the lawyers were looking for social workers to get into an area that isn't covered by the statutory services. And there's a richness of learning from that pool of lived experience of people who have been displaced and arrive on our shores. And my goodness, do we not need to know hear that now in the time of all the refugees and asylum seekers and people who've been displaced, and we hear the political response to it. And I, as a social worker and as a person, I just get completely reviled by it. So let's go on to Ali's story. I met Ali in a prison in Scotland. He was 22 years old, and I was interviewing, he'd been referred to me to do a report for the deportation tribunal. And this young man was last lived in Afghanistan when he was 4 years old, and his parents hid him under a dead body to protect him and the rest of the family from being killed by the Taliban. And he went to live in Pakistan, and they resettled. And in Pakistan, when he was 11 years old, there was an earthquake. And in that earthquake, his entire family were wiped out. His father was a merchant in Pakistan, and there was some money, and his employee looked after this 13-year-old boy. The employee was 18, but when he got to be 20, he wanted to marry, and he could no longer look after this young man. So he arranged for traffickers to smuggle him, to take him through, to find some safety and security in the UK. His journey on the way was horrific. He went in on the back of motorbikes, he went in lorries, he walked, he was sexually abused, he went to the police, the French police, but he was lured away, as often happens to young, unaccompanied children on these journeys. And he eventually came back, came to the UK when he was trafficked across the Channel, and 18 people were killed on the boat that he was across. He was trafficked up to Glasgow, and he was told to ask for the mosque. And he went to the mosque, and from there he was taken into the care of a local authority and became what we call an unaccompanied asylum-seeking minor. He went into a children's home. The staff didn't speak his language, he didn't speak their language. I have to say, when I look back on the social work records, as I had to for my work, I was appalled at what was recorded. What was recorded were all the arguments with the Home Office and the local authorities about the system and how what administration had to go on about him staying where he did. For him, it was quite different. For him, it was, I don't know anybody here, I don't feel safe, I've been abused, I've experienced all this trauma, they're pushing me into an education system where I don't speak the language, the teachers are not used to having young asylum-seeking children. It's a very, very lonely place to be. And your peers, which for many of the children living in Scotland, who might be in the care system, were not able to speak the same language also. So communication with your peer group, no family, and social workers who are tied up with trying to get Home Office sanction for somebody to stay in the UK, where is the person? So when he is experiencing huge difficulties in this children's home, he's seen as being disruptive and difficult. And that's what comes through the social work records. So he's moved on very quickly to supported accommodation at the age of 16, where somebody might help him with budgeting, cooking. But who's dealing with the trauma? So he, as a young man, meets up with other young people who do speak the same language, but they're all socially isolated. And his social group is pretty non-existent, excepting that they are people who feel rootless and homeless. And at an ice rink in the centre of Glasgow, which comes up every year, Hogmanay time, he meets some young people and he mixes with them. And in his culture, where he comes from, where we have early marriage, where relationships are different and so on, he finds people who he wants to have relationships with other lonely young people. And wow, somebody becomes pregnant. What a surprise. Where's the education about birth control? Where's the education about all the other things that go on for a young person who's been through that kind of situation? and the institutions that we work in. He's convicted of unlawful sexual intercourse with a young person who is 2 years younger than him. He now appears for life on the sex offenders register in Scotland. He is seen as a dangerous, dangerous man because he has committed a sexual offence. So the Home Office wants to deport him. There is a child of this union who is not allowed to see. He shows me a photograph when he's sitting in that prison cell. That child will never know her father. He's crying. What could we have done better? As social workers working in the UK, with somebody has been through that kind of trauma, and how do we do it just on a personal, individual level as social workers, but also how do we do it in tackling the systems that demonize people further than we would ever expect to do with our own citizens. This is real discrimination, it's institutional discrimination, and it needs to change. So I want to put, and I would hope you would all want to put, social work and the recognition of people and the social bit back into social work. We are not administrators, we're not system builders, we're there to work with people and be alongside people through change. So when we come to talking about co-building, this is as equals, this is the we of social work. This is the we of our communities. This is where we need to be. So let us think about rethinking how we do social work and how we can do it together with everyone in our society. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you guys hear me? Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Ruth, for sharing this case with us. I'm Mariam Khan. I am a child protection frontline social worker, but also a co-founder of an organization called Our World 2. And since in this session we are talking about co-building communities with the lived experience of refugees, I just want to share, I just want to contribute into how to build peace in communities. And the idea of community building is something very alien when it comes to frontline social worker like myself and most of the colleagues, and especially when we have colleagues coming over from different parts of the world and they share their experiences with us of how they are contributing in the communities. It's it's very different. So we totally agree that, in the front line, we do aid and support communities and families, but not in a context which is required and they live in. And among myself and colleagues, we have felt quite hopeless and dispowered in some ways. But equally, the conversations we've been having is about when we all sit down, it's like, how as social workers in the structure we work in, especially in the frontline children's services, how can we go and support our communities effectively? And within that, I have had a time of reflection, and that for me is come down to our skills, our very basic social work skills, and how we can use them with our work. And this is something I started doing with Our World 2, which is an organization I founded with a friend, Hira Thab. And a little bit story behind that is the shared passion we have of the voices of refugees, and how it should be part of the policy, and the policies should be made with them, not about them, because that's something we feel within UK and globally is the case. And we felt really strongly about how the negative rhetoric and the narrative about refugees in media, and especially presented by politicians, could impact on communities, but equally we know as social workers how the impact of language can have in the perception about certain community, and that's something we felt very strongly about. So reflecting on our own experiences and the value base was down to the environment we lived in, where we were surrounded by the stories of refugees, because I'm from Pakistan, my friend is from Pakistan as well. So growing up, any Pakistani who, we have, due to the partition of colonial India in 1945, we all have family members and friends and neighbors who are refugees, who have experienced displacement. And one of the things we recognized, the storytelling was a big part of Pakistani, it is a big part of Pakistani culture, but it's a really big part of how our development and our value base about how refugees are seen and part of our communities. And that was something, that was something which led for us to actually decide this is something we wanted to do. So we created Our World Too, which is a platform for listening to narratives of refugees and sharing it with the world in the way they like to be seen, and what they would like to know the world to see about themselves. In Our World Too, we have been very honored to speak with people about their wishes, their dreams, their hopes, and how they would like to be seen in the community they live in. And that kind of coincide with all the conversation Duke has and Ruth has about the trauma people have lived, the life they have left behind, and seeing them how they are. So but it comes down to the real values of social work and the skills of social work. I think that is in the heart of what we are doing, and the very fact that people open up to us, talk to us about one of the hardest thing they have gone through in their life is down to the skills we have and the values we present, and which is we talk to refugees as a person with dignity and respect. We listen, and we don't see we don't see them as someone else and beyond their labels, and we see them as human with voices and people just like ourselves. And we hope to share these stories because we feel with the form of storytelling, we can really contribute in building connections between refugees and the communities they live in within UK, because we feel that will help communities not only see them as refugees, but the people beyond the label and the status given to them by their passport. And this is something we strongly believe in. It's the lived experience and the stories of the people, because for us, that's the best form of advocacy which we can do as social workers and as a society as well. So thank you.
So this is our, I suppose, our summative reflections, really, last points. And just really that it's important to recognize that peace is an active and co-building process. Since World War II, we've had relative peace, relatively speaking. We've had the development of the Human Rights Act to protect us, individuals, the development of civil society and institutions, including professional associations like ours. We benefit from that, and we're advocates for human rights. Seeing what we see now today is really a big existential confrontation of what we live for and what we exist for. It just shows us that we can't take peace for granted. It is a co-building and active process. It does require safe spaces for dialogue to understand each other's journey. We have many different political views, but we need to have those safe spaces. Trauma can also last a long time. We may never, ever recover from what has been lost. Peaceful communities value diversity, inclusion, and reciprocity. That's really important to value the worth of the individual. Human rights has moved on somewhat. We now focus on our responsibilities and rights with each other and our planet to go build a new eco-social world for sustainable and well-being. This is the message from the UN and from the communities involved in the People's Global Summit, which we've got a link to. What can we do as a profession? We need to have an understanding of policies and practices which causes further distress and trauma. We need to advocate for cultural change in our politics, services, and communities. Those are our thoughts. Have you got any further? No. Over to you. Any questions?
Any questions?
No.
Anybody wants? Ruth, do you want to say something?
No. Okay.
We are running up against lunch, but such a fascinating and important topic. So we will take if there are a couple of comments or thoughts. Yes, please. Dan, I'll bring you the microphone.
Hi, I'm Diana from the Coventry and Warwickshire branch. I also do assessments for people with unsettled immigration status and NRPF. And I think it's really important what you were saying about building links within communities. There's still this kind of them and us, this big unknown gap. And in Coventry, it's actually quite successful in doing that. The Coventry Refugee and Migrant Centre is really building strong links all over the city and starting to see the benefits of that and people learning more about each other. So I just think that that was a really good point, and I wanted to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to get connected.
Should I take another point over here?
Yeah.
I want to say something about the UN's recognition of social work. Hi, I'm Callum. You made a really good point about how or what social work has become in terms of top-down managerialism, casework approach, and you're talking about the importance of human relationships, and that is really what we're here to do, is to work with people, and we need time to do that, to listen to them, to understand their life stories, and to find the best way forward with them that isn't just about fitting in with our systems. So do you have any ideas on how we can start to do that, to return to relationship-based practice?
Yeah. Go on. Pass me down. Well, there's some pointers in this book which you can download for free off IFSW. But people who with lived experience, who have had trauma, will choose who they want to share their stories with. They will decide who is the right person, who they can trust. And one of the things that I have always found is that if you let people tell you first their experience, and that's the whole issue about Famble Talk, which is a method of conciliation and mediation in Sierra Leone, where they've developed this, is each person tells a story, each other's stories, and they found that this worked in Germany as well in 2015 when we had a flood of migrants across Europe, that to get local communities to be responsive to the people who were seeking safety and refuge, if they each understood where they both came from, they could find a co-build a new kind of community where they both felt safe. And that was really, really important. So it's how we go into any interview or any first meeting with people. Are we receptive, and do people recognize that we are going to be receptive? And I think the importance of human relationships is hugely significant in social work. And I'm sorry that I don't think it comes through enough in social work training now, but I do think it's critical for people that we work with. After all, many of us sitting in this room will have been have lived experience of being of social work. Let's not forget that this is a universal service. And it's so universal that on World Social Work Day this year, the UN actually acknowledged our contribution to community harmony in terms of our professional skills, our human skills and our professional skills. So we are now being recognized at a level that wasn't, I can't even think about happening in the 70s or the 80s, or certainly not the 90s. So there we go, positive way forward. Listen.
Do you want to add quickly?
That was a really good question, actually, and thank you. Your contribution was really good. I think for social workers, I think it's really will be important if we have in the training something about refugee laws and policies, because when you are working in the front line, it's not something which is reflected in. And I think that will make the life of social workers in frontline really helpful and give them a lot better understanding of the situation they're dealing with.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone,
Thank
for
you.
sharing this space with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you, Ruth.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating and important and timely. So thank you very much.